episode 278 of the Broadcasters Podcast, broadcasterspodcast.com. King of Podcasts here with you. We got a whole lot to get into, a lot of stories, record labels, radio airplay, the rigging of music getting to the top of the charts. We also have to talk about the actors, SAG-AFTRA, now deciding to authorize their chance to strike because they have their own issues contending with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. That, plus so much more. Radio's got a really bad week. Odyssey, one of the second largest radio company, losing their spot on the New York Stock Exchange, being delisted as a stock. Major things happening, a lot of things happening this week. We're going to go and talk all about that here on the program. Thanks for listening in. Kind of fun. That's what you always do. BroadcastersPodcast.com. You find it right here. Everything that we're doing on the program, because there's just so much to bring up. And I'll tell you, Billboard decided to go ahead and put out an expose on this that really caught my attention. And I got to bring that up now. Bring it to light. The fact that the radio industry has been powerful, with music, but they're losing their spot. And Billboard, for some reason, still gives credence to the radio stations and the amount of airplay that they give. But remember, there's a lot of rigging going on behind what is actual radio airplay. It's not like they're not counting the actual songs, the amount of spins. They are. But it's because radio offers an unfair advantage to artists on big corporate labels. And because of that, we see certain artists always make it to the top of the charts, regardless of how well their song is really performing on streaming or other areas like sales, or how much appeal they have on social media, how much virality they get. Do they get a music challenge? Anything like that. It's all changing. And these are the issues that are going on right now. And this is something where it goes on. Now, as I read at the top of the show, the description in the blog post that accompanies this episode, I mentioned how about Mediabase. Targeted payments, overnight spins are just two of the tactics used by record labels to boost their artists' chart positions. Mediabase is at the center of this controversy. While some argue these practices are simply part of the game, others believe they undermine the integrity of the charts and unfairly disadvantage independent artists. The debate over the relationship between record labels and radio airplay charts is sure to continue for years to come, but it doesn't need to be. Let's call it out for what it is. It's not right. We do not need to be seeing this happen. But this story called out, listen, every time we see something about this, payola coming in, Rolling Stone called it out a couple of years ago. This still continues. The record labels still use the radio stations, but remember, the radio stations are not doing anything for the recording artists. Not enough. Streaming finally start paying somewhat more of a royalty to their artists. Apple more than Spotify. We get that. But radio doesn't. And radio can also just go ahead and rely on playing other artists' music that they have under the library for the fact they don't have to pay any new royalties. They're just paying old royalties off of something else that's been out there. But we know there's been things happening where the National Association of Broadcasters, a large lobbying group, has been able to go and keep things at bay from making BMI ASCAP, forced them to pay such significant royalties to the songwriters and the producers. But the artists themselves, getting actual royalties off their records, they're getting something from the streaming, for the amount of streaming that goes on. But with radio, they rig the amount of spins, they rig the amount of money getting doled out to the artists because they can't afford it. Radio doesn't have the money because they're not making enough money to give back to these artists. Meanwhile, the record labels, they don't have a problem giving them what the radio stations need to make them usable. They're really a usable entity. Okay? Because record labels already realize that radio stations now, they're not serving the purpose of the record labels that they once did. Because record labels will not spend money on radio stations to promote records or to promote artists by taking a record, stuffing some cash in it, or giving some tickets, merchandise, whatever, to move things forward. And since they're not doing it, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to take a story from Music Biz Academy that explains the essence of the relationship between record labels and radio stations. Now, this is from March 2010, but more or less does still hold water. It's still valid. So let's go into it. On the record label side, radio airplay is traditionally the best way for a record label to get their recorded music heard by the public. This is, of course, until streaming came into play, but this is what the original idea was. If people hear a song often enough to get familiar with it, they may like it and they want to buy it. Which is why when you hear stations that will play the top 5 songs and they'll be played 120 to 140 times a week, mean that station's going to play at least 90 minutes at a time. Between 90 minutes, you're going to hear the same song over and over. And they're going to just run it to the ground in heavy rotation. Any kind of radio airplay creates excitement about a new song, whether it's commercial, non-commercial, internet, or satellite. Smart music formatted radio stations work closely with the record labels to coordinate promotional events surrounding music releases. This is not the way it is anymore. That's what they used to do. We also had publicity efforts, retail store promotions, live tours, recording artists, each playing an important role in supporting the radio airplay a song gets with the hopes of creating sales on that record. And radio listenership back in 2010 isn't what it used to be, but it can still be a strong tool used by labels for exposing recorded music product. And social media also only does so much to get artists out there. But like I said, we've talked about where record labels have been completely corrupt, forcing their artists, like Halsey, who left her label. She had to go and put out a single and make sure it got viral before the single could be released as a appropriate single. And other artists had the same thing. But without the physical units of sales, it's all downloads now. While they have that here in play, what happens now is that radio detached themselves from the Billboard music charts in the 90s, when radio wasn't where we had the segmented thing we had in the 70s and 80s, where a distinguishing between albums and singles. Because there were certain types of genres that would only be albums that would not get radio airplay, but the singles would, of course. But it started changing. And what happened was there was a change where when you heard hard rock and rap being played on shows like American Top 40, because they played the Billboard Top Hot 100 up until, November 1991. And then they started changing to the Billboard mainstream charts, because it had homogenized, because hard rock and rap became part of the top 40 lexicon, and that wasn't allowed. Okay? They didn't want to have the hair bands or the rock bands like a Metallica having their music up and being charted in the top 40, or Two Live Crews, Me So Horny, being charted in the top 40. Radio had to curb that. They did not want to represent what the community was actually about. What actually people were listening to and buying in the stores. They said, no, we're going to change that. We're going to tame it. We're going to neuter it a little bit. We're going to take away some of the bite. We're actually not going to represent. Hit radio will not be represented like hit radio like before. We're going to worry about the pop charts. That's what we care about. And so it made it harder for acts of diversity, equity, inclusion, if we're going to use that. Artists could not cross over. But then what happened was, this is when we had the advent in the late 80s into the 90s of the rhythmic crossover. Okay? Because there were some stations that realized, because of the change of the algorithm, the way that Billboard was actually putting things out, and what radio stations wanted to be either contemporary instead of being top 40, then we created 2 categories. So there was top 40 mainstream, and then top 40 rhythmic, urban. Well, let's say rhythmic top 40. And rhythmic would allow rap. And then there were alternative stations or rock stations that would just go ahead and segment rock music. But in the 90s, there were some stations that were very progressive and would be rhythmic or would kind of play into that rhythmic category. And there were quite a few stations that, you know what, they said, no, we're going to go ahead and play certain music. Now, late 80s into the very early 90s, we had a lot of rhythmic CHR where R&B, rap were embedded into the top 40 lexicon, which is why I heard stations like Power 96 or Power Pig 93.3 WFLZ or Q102 in Philadelphia or Hot 97 in New York City or Power 106 in Los Angeles. I mean, there were all stations that did this thing and they just changed up. But then what happened was the rhythmic changed because then hip hop became even much more mainstream. So you had stations that were much more rhythmic, but then they got rid of the dance music that was part of the format or the freestyle music or other music that was kind of the new jack kind of swing kind of feel to it of what was R&B, rap, or even soul music. That all got eliminated because then rap became mainstream. And then rap on these rhythmic stations took over as the main genre on these stations. So they're very rap oriented, which is why Power 96 went very much rap oriented because it's what was very popular. And the other music that was dance or soul oriented or R&B oriented by the wayside. And remember, the urban stations that were always playing they were just black stations. They also adjusted in the 90s to compensate for this. Because in the early 90s, in the mid 90s, rap music was not put out there in mainstream yet. Hot 97 was one of the first stations to do it, but other markets did not really go full in on rap. LA did, but other markets didn't do that yet. In Miami, where I lived, or my market, right? WEDR, which is the consummate rap station now, they were very hesitant as a very heritage station to go ahead and change over into the music that was going on because for them, they would play rap music, but it was on their AM counterpart, WRBD. So between 3 and 7 o'clock, or actually after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they would go ahead and ultimately play the rap and R&B and the newer format on AM. But the FM side kept it more tame, kept it more adult, kept it more sophisticated. So R&B was still prominent. And then rap would not get played during the day. And actually wouldn't get played at night either. They would play it on the weekends. Because they didn't want to give that big a platform yet. Even though, you know, you had a lot of artists in the early to almost the mid 90s that were putting out a lot of records. Like there was a lot of rap music coming out. But then when you started seeing where Dr. Dre's The Chronic or Tupac and Biggie and Wu-Tang Clan and all these other artists started getting mainstream, then it was undeniable. Urban radio had to go rap, and then the R&B stations, the R&B music would be relegated and was fading out of those stations that were predominantly rap, to the point that by the early 2000s, they were relegated to adult R&B stations. Like there would be, of course, young-oriented R&B, your Trey Lanes or Chris Browns or Neos and all those, and Omarions, all those that are like that, right? That would be the change-up. But what happened is that urban radio changed, but there used to be a thing where some music would just get played and was put in one station as top 40. And if a song crossed over into the top 40, they would get played on a top 40 radio station, regardless. With some stations obviously probably not doing that because there's probably, it was just the way it was at the time. And the record labels, they were able to go and work off of that, where they had a chance for some songs, regardless of genre, if it was a top 40 song, if it was something that crossed over into the mainstream, get it on every station you can. Now it's different. And now you have certain stations that can go and play as many spins of a song as they want. And once corporate came in the mid 90s and deregulation came in and Clear Channel could buy up all the stations, and so could Infinity Broadcasting, and so could, J-Core and Evergreen Media
and all these other stations will then get swallowed up by iHeartRadio to give them the monopoly they have today. That's what's going on. It's not good. But this is what's being allowed. So let's get into what a story is from Billboard that actually talked about this. So in 2021, they say that a major label kicked off a radio promotion campaign for a song from an arena selling act. And the label's early moves was to earmark payments to an independent radio promoter that worked with a pair of radio stations in the Northeast, documented in an invoice reviewed by Billboard. And so they picked a couple of stations where the chart week before the date of the invoice, Mediabase, the radio tracking service, which services all these corporate radio stations, they are the calculator. They are the aggregator of all the radio airplay spins right now on the charts that get utilized for radio airplay, which is what is counted into the Billboard Hot 100 algorithm. So the invoice showed an allocation of $750 to the first station, $500 to the second. And after that invoice came in, the spins for that song increased markedly, rising by at least 15 on both. And Billboard was able to get from 3 different executives, one from a major label, one an independent label, and one a radio promotion, 14 invoices where they saw payments that resulted in increased airplay, increased spins of a record. Not because of, and this is just payola. It's just another form of payola, but it's a corporate form of payola because remember, if payola's fine and that's a normal practice, then why aren't the independent labels able to do this? Well, they're not. Now, documents for 2021 and 2022. Invoices show how payments ranging from several $100 to $1,500 moved from labels to one independent promoter, Jeff Dean. He runs Jeff Dean & Associates. And because of those payments, it resulted in spins at specific stations. Analyzing Mediabase data shows in the week those payments are invoiced, plays for the songs in question increased at the stations specified in 28 out of 30 cases. And Dean's practices have concerned those in the industry who appealed for government intervention last year, according to 2 sources. And the invoices made out to this consultant, this radio promoter, were obtained by Billboard include that nothing of value was or will be given to a radio station or radio station employee in exchange for airplay. And Dean and one of his employees did not respond to multiple requests for comment about how this business works. The FCC allows paying for airplay as long as those payments are disclosed at the time material is aired and identifying who is paying for it. And it's unclear if any of those disclosures were made in these 30 cases. Now, Billboard talked to Ed Flanagan, general manager of WNCS, and said that when WNCS or WXRV broadcasts programming that is sponsored by a third party, the practice of the station is to ensure that such sponsored programming is broadcast in compliance with the FCC's rules on sponsorship identification. Now, just to give a little context, WNCS radio is an independent radio station called The Point. It services Montpelier, Vermont, and they are an adult album alternative station. And WXRV, which is based in Boston, they are an independent radio station. They're also an adult album alternative radio station, AAA. Now, they service, they're licensed to Andover, Massachusetts, but they cover Northeast Massachusetts, Southern New Hampshire, and as far north is Portland, Maine, Plymouth, Massachusetts. So now, with them, I should go back and see like what their signal's like, but I'm not going to go back and worry about that. Well, I'll give you a radio locator. Here we go. So for them, their main signal, their local signal does hit the outer end of Boston, and the fringe signal also covers to Boston. The station is just north, but about 20 miles north of Boston. So easily the station makes it into the market. And as for this station, they are 25,000 watts at 700 feet above average terrain. So this station can cover into Boston, Massachusetts. Just keep that in mind, a AAA station. Gabriel Rossman, they talked to a professor of sociology at UCLA, author of Climbing the Charts, What Radio Airplay Tells Us About the Diffusion of Innovation. He agreed to review redacted versions of the invoices and the Mediabase reports that Billboard provided him. He says, we see this pattern, quote, between the invoices and the Mediabase reports that Jeff Dean and Associates gets paid to promote a particular song on a particular station. Then in the week that follows, the spins going up. He says that the activities could be above board. Is there a way to do that legally, he asks. In theory, you could by making a really good press kit or a really good PowerPoint. If you had to bet, that's probably not what happened. But in theory, that's what the job of an independent promoter is, to give a very compelling endorsement. The evidence I saw doesn't yet exclude the possibility that the promotional efforts they're doing are legal. So he's not saying it was. Okay. And independent promoters, they are the gateway to get more music played to these stations of a various variety of formats. Now, label promotion departments are working with multiple singles across a variety of formats: pop, alternative, or adult contemporary. The goal is pushing those songs up each format's chart so that more listeners hear them. Hundreds of stations that need to be called and persuaded to play a track. There's only so much time in the day, so labels hire middlemen who typically have experience and with relationships with individual local markets to augment these efforts. Contractors and independent promoters. They enjoy exclusive arrangements with particular radio stations that are all guaranteed regular, direct access to the programmers responsible for all the important playlists. Right. Retainer indies. But of course, you're only going to work with labels that are paying real money. They're not working with independent record labels. It's obvious. But Jeff Dean and Associates, they're working with some major labels that are willing to put some real money in there. Again, $700 to $1,500 per week per station to get these songs increased airplay to these stations. Who's getting that money? Well, I mean, it's the money that the independent promoter's getting and the ones the radio stations are getting. Now, who's getting the actual money? Now, we move along. There's more stuff about Dean and where he actually filed a lawsuit about a broadcasting company that he had, that there was an issue about exclusive agreements with stations. And where he described the way he relies on long-standing radio relationships to help artists receive meaningful radio airplay. Now, let's move along. One of the tricks they talk about now is this. This does not surprise me at all. Now, remember, radio stations at overnight spins we're going to talk about. Midnight to 6 a.m. So the thing is that a radio station, these days, you can bet dollars of donuts they do not have anybody live or even voice tracked overnight. And if they do, they're voice tracking very little. Maybe 3 to 5 minutes of airtime in a 60-minute time limit per hour. And they're probably only talking up records leading up into commercial break. And a couple of drops in between songs, just to make it sound like they're there. That's it. So there's on these cases documented on the invoices, the label payments occur at the start of a radio campaign. So the invoice, one of them that said indicate those the label made payments to Dean tied to several stations for a platinum selling rock band. WRTT, Huntsville, Alabama. KAZR, Des Moines, Iowa. WFXH, Savannah, Georgia. By the way, these are all middle market stations. In the 48 hours following the date on the label's invoice, these stations started to play the band's single, according to Mediabase. And another band sent Dean a similar invoice for station KYMK in Lafayette, Louisiana. Mediabase did show the group earned its first spin on that station 2 days after the invoice. Once they get paid, radio will play them. But it's also only certain artists that will get paid for play. Now, they talk about Elliot Spitzer in 2005 and the whole deal about major labels aiming to generate additional spins detected by the Airplay monitoring companies, even if the spins occur in the dead of night when relatively few people listen to the radio, or none really. So we went to that. We've talked about payola and the other areas they've gone to it. Now, last year, frustrated music executives secured a meeting with then New York Attorney General's office, which is now led by Letitia James, to complain about the practice of some independent promoters, according to two sources who spoke on anonymity. Eleanor Hoffman, chief of the New York Attorney General's Antitrust Bureau, and Jane Azia, chief of the New York Attorney General's Bureau of Consumer Fraud and Protection. Music executives mentioned Dean and others by name, according to the sources present, alleging that the activities violated the terms of the settlement agreements. Letitia James was not in this meeting, and they asked the New York AG to investigate independent promotions links to payola, like they asked Elliot Spitzer 2 decades ago. The New York AG's office did not respond to the request for comment. So it's on deaf ears. Radio. You can see it on the Billboard Hot 100 now, or you can look at it on Mediabase as we speak. You can just see what songs probably get into this kind of category, because you can remember songs that are being played and taking so long to get back up the charts, or just being on the charts in general. Let me tell you this. You know what the number one song right now in radio now at the moment? This is ridiculous. Ridiculous. But here's what we got right now. The top 40 Mediabase chart for the week ending May 18th, 2023. Number one song on Mediabase. Number one station. Number one song being played on contemporary hit radio stations. Let me tell you like this. It's a 2010 song, Miguel Shore Thing. Great song. Great song. Don't get me wrong. I loved it when it came out. I remember hearing it regularly when I was streaming KMEL in San Francisco in 2010 when it came out. It was hot. Great. It sounds great again. Thank you, TikTok. Made it viral again. And the funny part is that the song never charted in the United Kingdom the first run in 2010. But it did in February 2023. Actually, excuse me. It did it over in the UK. And it reached number 4. And that was Miguel's first top 10. So everything changed over there. We had the virality come into play. And then pop radio got the song in February 2023. The song re-entered the Billboard Hot 100 chart, peaking at a new peak of 14. And originally, it peaked at number 36 on the Billboard Hot 100 at that time, and number 1 on the U.S. R&B chart. So the song comes back. Now, by the way, recorded 2007. Released November 26, 2010. The song then came back again, charted worldwide, issued to pop radio in February. We're now in May. The song just now climbed to number 1 on the Mediabase chart. 3 months later for U.S. pop radio, but the song itself, I'm trying to remember when it was that actually it reached the top of the chart in the UK. I want to say it was back in January. Yeah, it was in January that song got back up there and got noticed again. And actually, it came up a little bit. I want to say it actually came up a little bit earlier than that. Hold on a second. I'll tell you right now. So, yeah. February 2023, it reached number 4 on that chart. And then all of a sudden, oh, here we go. And then it's an American song, American artist. And radio's 3 months late to the dance. Because they can. Your top 10 right now. Rima and Selena Gomez, Calm Down. Let me tell you about this song. This was number 1 last week. Or actually, it was most recently number 1. I'm going to take from a story called The Grape Juice. It became the first Afrobeat song to reach number 1 on pop radio in the U.S. And that was during the period of April 30th to May 6th. So 2 weeks ago. Number 1 song. And would be Rima's first ever single at number 1. Selena's 6th to ever hit number 1. Her first since Lose You to Love Me in 2019. But let me tell you about the song Rima and Calm Down. Okay. The song The original version was February 2022. And then in August of last year, Selena Gomez jumped on a remix. And the song would end up reaching number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. And I'm trying to remember what it was when she actually reached that top part. But you're talking about a song that got released August of 2022. Okay, give it a couple of months it might have taken to get there. But we're talking about now it hits number 1 after all this time. It was pretty much going to be a pop hit. But Mediabase and the control that they have decided, no, we're not going to play it right now. We're not going to put it up towards the top 10. No, we're not going to wait for that. And you look at their top 10 now. Flowers, Miley Cyrus, that's been out since last year. Metro Boomin' Creepin', that was last year as well. Kill Bill, last year. We Can Die For You, last year. Post Malone Chemical, that's a newer record, but Post Malone's got the pipeline. And I'm telling you, he's got one of those independent promoters under his label at Mercury Republic to push the artist up and up front. That's just how it works. And then you look at Pink Panthers and Ice Spice. That song went viral and now is currently in the top 10. Eyes Closed, Ed Sheeran. He's got Atlantic. They got an easy tie-in to the radio stations. Anytime Ed Sheeran has a song, they can push it up to the top. Sabrina Carpenter, Nonsense. Am I right? Did the song even chart? Hold on. Did her song even chart at all? I think it did, but it never went that high. I'm just trying to look and see here. Okay, and the song's from last year, by the way. But at the moment, it only got to number 56. That's it. And it got to 56 in January. And the song, which did not get played on, which Billboard Hot 100, number 56. That was its highest entry. It's now dwindling. I think it's down at the bottom of the chart now. I gotta look right now. Let me see if it shows where she's on the chart now and how far she is. Let me tell you right now. Here we go. The moment, yeah. The song peaked in February 4th. Only lasted 17 weeks on the chart. Or is that how many is it right now? Or is that all it is? Period. I'll tell you in a second. So if we look right now, I'm looking to see, and I think that song's not even on here anymore. I'll tell you right now. Hold on. I'm looking to the bottom, and I don't see it. Yeah, I think that song already left. It already dropped off the list. As I'm looking right now, it's not here. Am I missing it? Oh, no, number 60. So basically, the song never really went that far anywhere, and it's just been kind of dwindling in the 50s right now, and it's been 17 weeks on the chart. The song is a top 10 song at Mediabase. Really? Horrible. But nobody really makes an explanation about this, but this is where it's the corruption of radio that's ongoing. That just annoys the hell out of me. Which is why we need something to happen on various things so that these big corporate radio stations, these big corporate radio conglomerates cannot keep doing this. I'm not saying to break them up. I'm not saying it. But they need to pay a fair share. They're not paying any share. Okay? So for me, this gives me some joy to see the story that came out earlier in the week as well. There's a couple of things. One is Odyssey, which is the second largest radio company out there, being delisted on the New York Stock Exchange. Let's take that story real quick. Embarrassing, but true. And what are you going to do about it, right? Last check, I think it was 93 cents. It was selling share. There was 93 cents a share it was selling at before the New York Stock Exchange pulled the plug. let me just look at the Odyssey stock and see what it was actually doing. Because I never really actually looked at what their stock did before getting to this point. So let me see real quick that happened here. Okay. I'm trying to look for it right now. I want to find somebody that's going to tell me where it is here. But let me go ahead. Let me see where Yahoo tells me. Okay. Let's see if they got it here. All right. Let's look at the 6 months they have, right? At the moment, they were just selling nothing. Let me try to go year to date. Okay. So January 2023. Let me see if I can find this here. Hold on. Let me see if I can find this chart. Okay. Like, we're talking about this thing really was just not doing much at all. Actually, at the end, it was closing at 0.0936. Excuse me. 9 cents a share. Oh, excuse me. So it started at $2.53, and this is, what is this? May 2nd, 2022. So this is the year. Let me see if I can go a little bit farther. Let me go back, see if I can go 5 years. Hold on. So as we know, they've had a lot. Now, after the pandemic, the shares of their stock went down to 82 cents, right? If I go back to, what is it, the highest was what, $7, actually was around the $8 mark in July of 2018. Took a drop down in August of 2019 down to $3 and then got as low as, what is it, $3.12. And then 2020, and then they bounce back up and they get to around $6 February 2021. Then a continual drop, decline all the way into the start of this year, February 14th, $2.37. And then they got up to $3.24 and have continued to drop since March of 2022. To start off the year, they got down to, what, 23 cents and kept going down to 9. Under 10 cents, yep, we're out. That's it. That's a penny stock. It's a penny stock. They had nothing that was going to bring forward anything. They're stuck. Now, the company shares have not closed above $1 per share since July 2022. I don't know what they're doing at the moment, how they've been lasting and all, but again, 0.94 cents. That's amazing. Share price is down 60%, 63% since the beginning of the year. New York Stock Exchange drops it down for an abnormally low selling price. Trading the company's common stock in exchange will be suspended. What about the people that said, well, we're going to go ahead and, we have to go ahead and, we're giving you stock as part of your salary or as part of your bonuses or your perks. Which radio people thought it was a good idea to hold on to that dumpy stock, huh? David J. Field, Odyssey's president and CEO, said while the company is disappointed, he's hopeful that Odyssey stock will start trading on the exchange later this year as they execute action plans which include a reverse stock split to satisfy NYSE rules. And the company is confident it will benefit from a general market recovery and be able to capitalize on our investments and strategic transformation that position Odyssey well for the future. Now, radio companies have already been slammed by an advertising slowdown since 2022, second half of 2022. First quarter earnings, net revenue was down 6% year over year. Cash operating expenses were up 3%. Adjusted earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, $3.5 million compared to $26 million in the first quarter of 2022. So they're dropping like flies right now. The advertising revenue for the network down 6% year over year due to inflation. Podcasting revenue was up 14%, but that's not enough. And their CFO says that, I try to put a bow on this, but remember, actions may not be sufficient that they're doing to fully mitigate the impact and potential of further advertising weakness. Yeah, less people going to radio to advertise. First place they're getting cut. And if radio can't make money on these big deals that they're trying to do, where corporate radio wants to go ahead and try to create revenue streams for each platform, streaming, FM, AM, and the website, whatever else, like, or they're podcasting, it's just not going to work. They charge so much. They're bloated. They're not going to make enough money to handle what they're doing. This is where I think the company, I don't know how they're allowed to go ahead and stay like this. But private equity, right? Private equity for a company like iHeartRadio, they could just continue to move along. And they don't care. Now, Entercom is the company that bought out all the CBS stations, and they're still around. And they have not been bought by any private equity yet. Not yet, it looks like. But that's one of the things that eventually they're going to probably have to get into that. Now, and eventually that's what's going to come up. Nothing else they can actually do. So they're hurting really bad right now. And this is what they get. Poor programming, poor management, talent being underused, underappreciated, disenfranchised. Horrible. They're being treated badly. That's just how it is. So I got a bunch of other stories to go and get into. Let's go ahead and run through some of the radio headlines I got. So there was a story from Inside Radio talking about AI teaming with potential and concerns. Listen, when you get radio people that want to go and talk about automation, they're going to just want to try to do something with it. So they did a thing where they talked to several CEOs of companies. Town Square Media CEO Bill Wilson. Dramatic change for all businesses. We're not even the first inning. Beasley Media Group's Caroline Beasley says it offers a great opportunity for radio. It's not going to so much replace people, but it will help us make our content better. You don't have to have live and local overnights. What we can do is provide better content overnights by using that. David Centrella, Salem Media Group CEO, says he cautions against AI without human intervention. If you choose to use AI, you need to choose to be very responsible with it. That's what they brought from that story there. And then the International Association of Broadcasters, they're going to be holding a conference coming up. A podcast up front, notebook they actually had. The IIB podcast up front happened last week. And several of the big major players in podcasting showed up. So iHeartMedia announced the launch of a new branded podcast studio called Ruby. Conal Byrne, the Digital Media Audit Group CEO, says they have 73 podcasts. They each have more than $1 million per month. A lot of that's because broadcast radio marketing. So when they bring on a new show, the first thing iHeart aims is to get the podcast over the $1 million per month line in order to build an audience, then use the show to build other podcasts from it. Odyssey, they are saying that the key for them is how they can reach licensors on devices that have been black box and not been addressable, smart speakers. So they're going to begin to use a data marketplace called TransUnion, featuring 55,000 different audience segments with the first-party registration data of Odyssey. See who they can try to engage, whatever. NPR is relying more on podcast ads. They want to show ad buyers to show off their shows. And the public radio has been able to lean into its brand safe and highly trusted content to appeal to marketers. Cumulus says they're focusing on a podcast lineup of bold voices with 4 content areas: news talk, sports, lifestyle, entertainment. And there was a couple others that talked, and I'm just not going to worry about that. And so we talked about iHeartMedia, about what they did. There's some other stories that are in here. One that's interesting, that's a break for radio, and FCC wants to give it to them, is their annual fee. Cutting it. Especially for small market stations. It's a proposal, though. So some of the small stations could see their fees reduced by much as 43%. And that's where the FCC reallocates how much full-time employee expenses are divvied up. Creation of a new payment tree of radio stations that says it will release in fees that are more equitably distributed among all radio stations. So they're trying to do tier thresholds. And they're trying to make it so that they're trying to make enough money on the fees so that it will afford what the FCC has to run for operating expenses, of which the Biden administration has allocated $390 million for the FCC in their budget. And so for radio, they have to collect at least $138 million from ministries regulated by the Media Bureau to be able to make good for what they're trying to get on the budget. Okay. And there's a story I took from here that I thought would be good. Real quickly, just make a mention of a Billboard that the Hot 100 Top 10 countries tying pop on the most songs hitting up at the top of the charts in the top 10. R&B overtaking hip hop, which is a trend that's going on right now. Some music is being played over others. Either which way, pop music's not there much anyway because of the fact it's very limited of what's up on the top 10. And because there's only the top 10, it gets so much airplay and sales and streaming and all, and there's not that much new coming out. The rest of the Hot 100 is consumed by album cuts or songs that have been around for 6 to 9 months to a year, and various songs from other genres, including reggaeton, including regional Mexican now, which we talked about a few weeks ago, and country. It's just much different. So another story I got to bring up. SAG-AFTRA, Screen Actors Guild, American Associated Federation of Television and Radio Artists, right? They have voted for strike authorization, much like what the Writers Guild did about a month ago, leading up to the May 1st deadline. So SAG-AFTRA has voted unanimously to recommend the union members authorize a strike in advance of the new film and TV contract. Negotiations begin June 7th. SAG-AFTRA and National Board agreed unanimously to recommend the members vote to authorize. And the last strike against the studios was in 1980, a 95-day walkout establishing contract terms for pay TV and video cassettes. Fran Drescher is the president of SAG-AFTRA. Yes, the nanny. She says, member leadership stands in solidarity with the negotiating committee and national board levels moving forward with a strike authorization. We must get all our ducks in a row should the need present itself. The prospect of a strike is not a first option, but a last resort. As my dad always says, better to have and not need than to need and not have. So, a yes for a strike coming up. Postcards will be sent to eligible members with instructions on how to vote, and voting will close June 5th. And this comes on the day of the Writers Guild strike, being day 16 as I record this, or the third week of the strike. And the Directors Guild began contract negotiations with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers on May 10th. So the dominoes are starting to fall as they may. Negotiations with the Directors Guild, the Writers Guild, and the AMPTP have not gotten to any kind of conclusion. And now the actors are coming up next as they continue to go along. And various people have jumped into the picket lines. Jason Sudeikis, Zoe Kazan, Gina Gershon, Richard LaGravenesse, Flavor Flav. They're all coming into it. The Writers Guild comedy writers are now launching a YouTube show to lampoon the studios. They're all talking all their part. Yeah, they don't care, man. They're just going to rag on. Why not, right? And because of the Writers Guild strike, we should take a couple of things that come off of that. One is from Deadline that as broadcast fights for survival divided, AMPTP could face splintering over conflicting agendas. The Writers Guild negotiated contracts with film and TV studios while the TV business slowly evolved, and original series eventually expanded from broadcast to cable. Well, now we have the streaming. Now, Netflix around 2011 entered the programming arena with a 2-season order of House of Cards, and Netflix would join AMPTP 10 years later, 2021, But now everything's different. You have tech giants like Apple, Amazon, for which their money is being spent on film and TV production is a rounding error, as one industry source quipped. And so now, this year's negotiations currently broken off with the Writers Guild on strike, even more complex. So, one negotiating chair for the Writers Guild, Chris Kaiser, told Deadline, AMPTP is divided, and that I don't really know how much Netflix has in common with Paramount Plus or NBC Universal. Disney's also different, Amazon and Apple, so they're going to have to work through all of that, and it's going to play out interestingly. So the streaming services are all now embedded into this. It's going to be a lot to try to figure out. That's going to be tough. And speaking of the streamers, David Zaslav, who his group, Warner Brothers Discovery, just did their upfronts this week. They're doubling on wrestling, All Elite Wrestling. They're the wrestling brand out there. The second one to the World Wrestling Entertainment. I talked about it extensively on my Wrestling is Real podcast. Well, David Zaslav, their CEO, actually talking about that rival streamers should bundle together. If we don't do it ourselves, it will be done to us. He's speaking truth. There should be a consolidation. More likely to happen than the repackaging and marketing of products together. And that's what I think makes sense, he says. We have to, as an industry, reach that point. He spoke at a media conference at the Moffat-Nathanson event. And Warner Brothers Discovery is about to launch Max next week, which is a combo of HBO Max and Discovery Plus. Disney announced plans last week to combine Disney Plus and Hulu in one app. And right now, executives find to attract new subscribers to reduce churn. All agree bundling really helps. The overall streaming environment is still very much fragmented. And this is a problem now that's going to continue. But he actually is saying something, David Zaslav, something that's very relevant right now. One other story I want to bring up before we wrap things up, and that's Rumble, which is a free speech video platform. They decided to go ahead and now acquire an audio platform called Callin. I never heard about this, but this is interesting. It's something to keep an eye on. So Rumble is now going to podcasting to buy Callin, which is a San Francisco-based podcasting and live streaming platform. So the Callin team will continue to develop live streaming capabilities as part of Rumble. How much Rumble's paying for Callin is a work in progress, but according to a filing with the SEC, Rumble told shareholders it's an all-stock deal, yet the company is still in the process of evaluating and determining the fair value of Callin. That's C-A-L-L-I-N. It was launched in 2021 by investors David Sachs and Axel Ericsson. It builds itself as a social podcasting platform, a mashup of live audio and podcasting, offering listeners a live stream audio listening experience to call in, ask questions similar to what they did for talk radio for decades. The show's over, it becomes an on-demand podcast. Kind of like a better version of Blog Talk Radio, pretty much, right? So, Rumble is going to go ahead and now work here. And, they're known for probably some controversial names, you would say, that have joined that platform. You got Russell Brand, you got Donald Trump Jr., you got Steven Crowder, you got Russell, those are the names. Russell Brand, did I already say Russell Brand? Yes. And others. And of course, there's going to be some people that are going to really go ahead and, they're going to be kind of upset about that. YouTube is still the market leader, but Rumble is trying to do something for themselves. They did make $17 million in revenue during the first quarter of 2023, and it's increased by 330% compared to a year ago. And it was driven by more ad dollars and the addition of new content. Rumble's estimating they had a estimated 10.8 billion minutes of video watched per month during the first quarter, and hours of uploaded video on year-over-year basis increased 82%. So there you go. Interesting altogether for all that. So that is everything today. I didn't realize I was going to go ahead and cover it all, but I did. The Broadcasters Podcast is part of the King of Podcasts podcast network, radio network, which you can find at kingofpodcasts.com. Broadcasters Podcast is the website.
The show is available on Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify. Please make sure to rate and review the show on Apple and Spotify. If you want to reach out to me, want to be a guest of the program, you got any comments or questions, please reach out to me, kingofpodcasts@yahoo.com. I'm on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, @King of Podcasts. Until next week, remember the content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.